Welcome to the congregation of Yahweh in Panama City, Florida. We come together to worship Yahweh in spirit and truth and come to the knowledge of Yahweh. And there's a treasury of scripture knowledge that we need to comprehend in order to understand the complexity of what the Bible is speaking about, salvation, the complexity of it. The pattern that's laid out for salvation is the salvation of the house of Israel. Israel is who Yahweh is speaking to in the scripture. And many people don't know who Israel is. They have the idea that one doctrine that goes out is the difference between the Jews and the Gentiles. Some people think the Jews are all Israel. But when you analyze the scripture, you find that the Jews are one family in a house of 13, because Joseph had a double portion and there became two tribes in the house of Joseph. And then Yahweh did extra work with Moses and Aaron to bring out and distribute Israel into a promised land and to form them into a nation. And that nation then has been utilized to perform Yahweh's salvation plan. Many people don't study it deep enough to find out, but think about the history of Israel. When they became a nation, after they came out of Egypt, they set up a kingdom under the guidance of Yahweh, and he used his servants, the prophets, to direct and guide and set up the dynasty of the kings. And it's interesting to see the pattern and how they moved in their march when they came out of Egypt. Moses was leading by the spiritual instruction, and the entire house of Levi was the one that kept the tabernacle. And they operated through that, and the other tribes were placed in strategic places. And when they were marching, they marched in 4 brigades. And you can search the scriptures and follow this story to get a good idea about how it is. But for time's sake, Judah was the lead tribe, and he had a brigade of 2 tribes with him, and that was Issachar and Zebulun, and they were out front. When the tribe moved, when Yahweh had them in the wilderness, every time they stopped and camped, when they started to lead out, well, the tribe of Judah went out front. And Issachar and Zebulun was on either side of the brigade. And then in the next step, Dan, the tribe of Dan, their armies went out, and with them the other armies was Asher and Naphtali. And then over on the south side, Reuben was the lead tribe, with the tribe of Simeon and Gad with him. And the tabernacle was in the center. And when they came to stop, and they did stop several times and just stayed for weeks, but every time they stopped, the tabernacle was in the center, and when they were in the wilderness and Yahweh was dealing with Moses and they all stayed camped, they were camped in this format. And the rear guard was Ephraim, the son of Joseph, and his brother Manasseh and Benjamin. And that's the format of where Israel was. And this continued all while they were in the wilderness, while Moses was receiving the law and educating the people. And I think that he had to stop them in the wilderness and give them some education. And this was a learning experience. Now, when you read it, it's laborious to go through it, but you think, wonder why in the world they can't just get up and go. Because if you look at on the map, an army today can run across there on a few jeeps and even march the armies in a few days. But it took them months to get across there because of their rebellion. Yahweh shut them down. Well, it seems like that spirit is still in the world today. Wherever Israel has gone, we still have that spirit. And then we have different religions. Generally, it's Christianity, divided into several different factions, and every one of them has a different slant on the scriptures, and so we're still in confusion. We don't know which one's right. Nobody can prove it. Everybody thinks they're all right. We're always right in our own mind, but Yahweh still got something to do to save Israel in order to save the world. The Gentile, and the word Gentile simply means nation. It don't mean like most people understand it. The average person thinks that if you're a Gentile, you're just somebody that's living that is not a Jew. And a Jew can't be a Gentile. So it's the difference between the Jews and the Gentiles. And that's a false argument. It don't hold water with the scriptures. And it's not going to be anything in the end except confusion. And we need to understand that in order to get a good idea of what Yahweh wants us to do for us to grow in scripture knowledge, so we can see what is actually happening. Now, when they were carried away into captivity, the northern 10 tribes, in the year 730 or 722 BC, Israel kind of goes off of the scene as far as history goes. The next step, a few years later, Nebuchadnezzar's empire comes up strong and captures Judah and the rest of the families that was with Judah, and carried them away into captivity. And you could get a good idea in Daniel of how that operated. And then when the fall of the Assyrian Empire, of the Nebuchadnezzar's empire was done, you find that the Assyrian armies is the one that defeated him. They destroyed the city of Babylon. The Babylonian Empire was crushed by that Assyrian Empire. And when you analyze the Assyrian Empire and go in and really do some research, you find out that the soldiers that was in the Assyrian Empire was mainly the Israelites, who were their captives that grew up, become slaves, and entered into their military and became a formidable empire with military strength. And they were able to come against Babylon. Well, then as soon as that was over, Yahweh allowed Assyria to disintegrate. And when it did, well, many of the people began to migrate. and some migrated east, some migrated south, but the majority of them migrated north into the Caucasus Mountains. And when they came through the Caucasus Mountains, Europe was virtual uninhabited, but there were a few people there. But this mass of humanity that came in there melded into the population that we call Europe. One of the sidebar events that happened is a group went into Mongolia. And later on, when Rome became a strong empire with wealth, great wealth, this group of people came out of Mongolia, and they were called Huns. And most people in their mind, if you're talking to them today that don't study history good, think of them as Mongolians. But these Huns were not Mongolians. They just dwelt in Mongolia. They were white Caucasians, and they fought against the Roman Empire. And when Attila the Hun got to the streets of Rome, he did that for an effort to take Rome for its money. His army was like a thief in the society, and he wanted to destroy the Roman Empire, but he failed, and he died in the streets of Rome. And today we have a nation called Hungary, and half the German population is called Huns, from this population of Caucasians that melded into that population. And since then we've had wars and rumors of wars and all that, and then the migration of the people migrated on into the other tribes into northern Europe, and we have one specific group called the Danes, or the Dans. The scripture says that Dan would leave a waymark, and that means that Dan would leave his name in the history and signposts, names of towns and land. And so when you get to looking at history as what we call the westward migration, as Europe populated, and they populated into the British Isles, and if you follow the Norman invasion, they came out of what is now northern France, but it was called Normandy, and they ruled for many years in England and melded into the population. And then England also had wars amongst themselves and amongst the islands around, and Scotland and Ireland and all of those have been melded into what is known as the British Empire. And then a few years ago, in or the 1700s, the colonies began to move into the eastern part of the United States, and then a little bit later we migrated to the west. But the population of this country consists of that mixed population of people that came through Europe, through the islands, and all the way over here. And the scripture teaches that Yahweh is going to save Israel wherever he has scattered them. And so it behooves us to understand where Israel can be. And it's not an organized body of people, because Yahweh completely hid them from the world. And he drove them and he punished them in their migration because of their sin. And I think we're still being punished today because of our attitude toward Yahweh. We still don't believe in Yahweh. We put on a religious pretense, and it's not good. We need to really get down to see what what Yahweh is going to do with Israel, because that's the key for salvation of the world. And it's not an ethereal salvation like most people think. I believe that Yahweh intends to keep this population until he comes to the resurrection. There is a promise of a future resurrection. It could come at any time, as most people think, but I believe that there's still some things got to be done that Yahweh will do and accomplish. But we need to think about our roots. What Yahweh said that he would, when he told, let's see, Jacob, when he dealt with Jacob, he changed his name after Jacob did what he said do. And he says, because you have not withheld your son. So he says, give me your son. If you remember that story, go back and read that story. And then he literally took him to an altar. And he drew the knife back to stab his son so he could slay the son so he could offer him on the offering. And when he got that far, Yahweh spoke to him and says, harm not the lad, because you have not withheld your son. Your seed shall number as the sand of the sea and the stars of the heaven, and they will be driven to the end of the earth. And you look at that, and then look at a map and being driven of all the different migration patterns that's accomplished, and you can see that the major migration was driven to the west. Some of them went east, some went south, and some stayed in the area. Some went north, but the majority of them, when they went north, they went west. And we look at our history for the last, say, 1,000 years, and especially since America has become the greatest nation on the earth, you can see Yahweh's hand in the population of this nation, and the people that we have here is a mongrel nation. Yahweh is using that to hide Israel, but when he gets ready to come back and establish his kingdom, we're going to see some things that is going to stagger the imagination of the people. But in this pattern that he used when he was dealing with Moses, he camped Judah in the front, and with him he had Issachar and Zebulun, and he had Reuben to the south, and Simeon and Gad was with them. And then he had Dan and Asher on the north, and he had Ephraim and Manasseh on the west. And Levi was with Moses, camped in the middle with the tabernacle. Levi, the Levitical tribe, the whole tribe of Levi, was the attendant of the tabernacle. And that's the identity of Yahweh's people wherever they go in the earth. And I believe that we are the descendants of that people. And when you really get to studying Western history, you will see that it correlates with the Scripture. And Yahweh is going to soon establish his salvation, and I believe a lot of people will be surprised. Nobody can prove how he's going to do it, but he could still have flesh and blood human beings in his earthly kingdom in the future. And if not, we can be refined and in the resurrection and see him in his full glory. And we need to really pay close attention to this scripture that Yahweh wants his people to turn to him. And by keeping the feast, keeping the right Sabbath day, studying the scripture and applying it to our lives, we can grow in the knowledge of Yahweh. May Yahweh bless and keep you.